Welcome to the Psychiatry and Psychotherapy podcast, the podcast to help you in your journey towards becoming a wise, empathic, genuine, and connected mental health professional. I'm your host, Dr. David Puder, a psychiatrist who splits his time practicing psychopharmacology, individual and group psychotherapy, medical director of a day treatment program, medical education research, and teaching residents and medical students. Okay, and welcome back to the podcast. This is your host, Dr. David Puder, and today I am going to be talking about how to optimize total brain function, something I call Sensorium. This is part 2 in this series, and basically Sensorium is total brain capacity, which is used for focusing, processing, interpreting. It's, how you feel sort of bright and chipper in the morning, and then as the day goes on, you may feel more sluggish. That's your sensorium decreasing. It can be influenced by sleep, food, stress, exercise, drugs, medications. Long-term, it can be your genetics can change. It's called epigenetics, so you can downregulate or upregulate different genes, and that will all influence sensorium. So in the first session on Sensorium, I went through some stories of some different patients I've had and kind of painted the global picture of Sensorium. I talked about severe Sensorium issues called delirium. And in this episode, I'm just going to remind you of a study that I talked about on stress, and then I'm going to launch into how to optimize diet for increasing Sensorium. This is a topic I'm passionate about. It's something that, I don't get drug reps coming to my office telling me about the benefits of healthy eating for my mood and for my brain function. So there's not a lot of advertisements on television for this, there's just not the money behind it. And so in psychiatry, it's so important to focus on the things that may not get the sort of limelight. They may not be, tons of companies clamoring to do studies on this topic, but there is pretty amazing stuff out there. I wish it was as prolific as some of the drugs and that kind of stuff, but it's pretty amazing. So just to kind of launch into it, when a patient comes to see me and they're seeing a psychiatrist, maybe for the first time, maybe they've seen psychiatry for a while, I think in my brain as I'm going through their story, did they have drastic changes in their diet? Sometimes people, when they get depressed or down, they start, eating more junk food, or their diet kind of disappears as in healthy food. And, how does that sort of relate to their sort of pathway through life, through their journey, through the symptoms that they've had, so on and so forth. One study that I touched on before is on chronic stress. And in one study in particular, they looked at rats who were restrained by metal wires. So they had these rats and they were restrained, so they were unable to move in these sort of metal wires for 6 hours a day for 21 days. And those rats that were restrained like that had cognitive deficits. They had hippocampal damage. That's the memory area. Imagine your neuron is like a tree with tons of branches, and these neurons in this, stressed out rat actually had less branches, the tree looked fundamentally different. These are what neurons look like in someone who is chronically stressed. When we think about stress, because we're all going to face stress. Not all stress is bad. Actually, stress can lead to adaptation. It can lead to you getting stronger. How could this rat have been stressed in this way and gotten stronger? That's really difficult, because this was 21 straight days, 6 hours a day. Did the rat have his friends to sort of discuss and talk about the stresses of that cage after he had that stress, or was he left alone for the rest of the day and just able to sort of, spin the wheel? Did he have a wheel to spin? Did he have healthy food, or did he have normal food? All these things I think will change the degree at which the stress will influence that rat. And although those factors weren't played into the study, we can see these types of studies by large in in more global populations. And so I'm going to be going through different studies and how diet changes the influence of brain function. A lot of it, I think, has to do with what I would call recovery. Okay, so we have stresses in our life, we have periods of potential recovery, and then we have the potential for adaptation. And I think the right diet can change how stress is both recovered from and can also rewire our brains to basically handle stress differently. One paradigm to basically share at this point is that all stress is experienced in the body in the same way. Now, there's different magnitudes of stress, but the stress pathways are all the same. Okay, we're always, meaning that, the hormones released by stress are the same. Cortisol, all the norepinephrine, all those different natural sort of innate immune responses to stress are all the same, regardless of the type of stress. Okay, so that's going to tie in as we go on. So first of all, how do we optimize our diet? Now, one thing that sort of comes into my mind as I think about diet is changing your diet can be stressful. You go ahead and try to drastically change your diet. If you live with anyone else, it's going to be really hard. That other person is going to notice, they're not going to like it. If you're married, your spouse all of a sudden may be like, whoa, we can't eat the same foods we used to enjoy eating together. It can be really stressful, to change your diet. And sometimes, with some patients, when they're super stressed, it's not something I push right away. But when people get to a certain point, diet is something I engage them with. And one study that was really interesting, so this is more kind of like just a general picture of the influence of diet, is there was a study in Israel where they followed 8 judges for 10 months. And during these 10 months, these judges ruled over 10,000 applications made by prisoners to parole boards. Is this person going to get out early? Is their incarceration time going to change? And the team found that, the people doing the study, found that the judges granted, a lot more positive, yes, we're going to decrease the time of incarceration. Yes, we're going to let this person out early at the beginning of the day. And as time passed on, the numbers fell sharply, even reaching like 0. Like, no, I'm not going to let this person change. But after each of the breaks that they had, so they had 2 breaks during the day, the judges retired, had some food, rested. When they came back, they were a lot more lenient to sort of grant early parole and those types of things. So, we're talking about the difference between granting almost no, change in the sentence versus like 60% positive changes, 70% positive changes at the beginning of the day. So I'm going to put the graph on that in the on my website. If you want to follow the podcast to the website, you can see the little graph. It's pretty outstanding. And this is a picture of both sensorium and the influence of food. How food changes the brain, how people process differently when they're hungry, when they're tired, when they're worn out, versus when they're fresh, they had a break, they had some food, and now they're ready to go back in. So one of the big things that I read in multiple studies is the importance of a more Mediterranean diet. And this is one of the most sort of well-studied things for brain function is the Mediterranean diet. So Mediterranean diet, in case you were wondering, high fruits, high vegetables, high cereals. So cereals I would think of as like slow burning fuels, things like oatmeal, those kind of things. High legumes, so like beans, lentils, and it's low in saturated fats and higher in more of the monounsaturated like olive oil, higher in those types of fats. And it's low to moderate in the consumption of fish and low to moderate in intake of dairy products, and low amounts of red meat and meat products. So, the Mediterranean diet has been associated with lower rates of depression. It's been associated with better cognitive function, lower rates of cognitive decline, and reduced Alzheimer's disease, lower rates of stroke. It's been associated with lower self-reported subjective cognitive function in a study of 27,842 people. They found that there was lower self-reported subjective experience of cognitive function. So the people who were on the Mediterranean diet, felt like they thought more clearly. In this particular study, they followed these people for 56 months and showed that those who were eating the most nuts, veggies, fruits, fish had lower rates of cognitive decline. So the people who were eating more vegetables, fruits, higher fish compared to meats and eggs, and more whole grains, which is like, good fibers, oats, beans, lentils, that kind of stuff. Those people had lower rates of cognitive decline. And when they separated them into groups, so the people who were most following that type of diet and the people who were least following that type of diet, the healthiest diet compared to the least healthy had a hazard ratio of 0.76%, which means they were 24% less likely to develop cognitive decline. That's impressive. This is a large study, okay? This is following these people for several years. And, so this is like an epigenetic phenomenon. This is not only epigenetic, but it's probably there's multiple bodily symptoms being influenced by poor diet, but all of that compounding to have the people eating the sort of the most Mediterranean diet having the lowest level of cognitive decline. Okay. So in another study of 6,183 nurses, and they were studied for 5 years, and they had serial cognitive testing, showed that the ones with the highest saturated fat diets had more significant decline in cognitive function compared to those with high monounsaturated fatty acids, like things like avocado, peanut butter, nuts, seeds, olive oil, and peanut oil. So the people eating the monounsaturated fats had less cognitive decline than the people with the high saturated fats. Total fat and polyunsaturated fat, things like soybean oil, corn oil, was not associated with cognitive trajectory. Meaning, in this particular study, people who ate a higher percentage of fat or a lower percentage of fat, that in and of itself was not associated with cognitive trajectory that, did cognitive function decline. It was the people who were on the high monounsaturated fats who did the best. So avocados, peanut butter, nuts, seeds, olive oil, peanut oil, those types of things. Okay, in a study of 1,449 people that were followed for 21 years, high saturated fat diets were associated with poorer global cognitive function and prospective memory compared to high intakes of polyunsaturated fats. Also, frequent fish was associated with better cognitive function and semantic memory. Both of these, indicating sensorium was improved with fish. So higher PUFA, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, to saturated fatty acids. So the people who had kind of like a higher proportion of PUFAs compared to saturated fats had better executive function and psychomotor speed. So here you go, 2 studies that I just went over on the importance of eating more of the polyunsaturated fats for long-term global brain function optimization. The next thing I'm going to mention is the value of omega-3 supplementation. So, omega-3s versus omega-6s. So omega-3s are the ones that are going to be important. And omega-3s can be found in flaxseed and chia seed, salmon, and fish oil. I think that those are the sort of the big places where you can get high omega-3s without getting high omega-6s. I used to recommend like walnuts, and those can be good for other reasons, but those actually have a lot more omega-3s. So if you want to get, omega-6s. Walnuts have a lot more omega-6s than omega-3s. So if you really want to get a lot of omega-3s, you get it through flaxseed, chia seed, salmon, or fish oil. And for example, one animal study showed higher omega-3 diet had better working memory and reference memory. One meta-analysis, which means they looked at multiple studies, found that high omega-3 intake helped those with cognitive impairment, but not dementia in terms of attention and processing speed and immediate recall. So, people who already have dementia may be hard to treat, may be hard to help, but people with some cognitive impairment but not dementia did have some improvement in attention, the ability to focus, concentrate, processing speed, so how quickly you sort of process things. In another study of children aged 7 to 9, those with lower DHA and EPA in their blood had a small associated poorer reading ability and working memory performance. What they found was that basically DHA and EPA, these are two different types of omega-3s. When it was lower in the blood, which means that they have a lower diet, with these being lower in the diet, and they have a lower ability to move them into the blood, okay? And these people with a lower amount of omega-3s running around in the blood had a poor reading ability and working memory performance, okay? And this was in children age 7 to 9. So what do? I give my kids some gummies with some omega-3s in it, and my son loves his salmon, and we do some flaxseed in the oatmeal, we do some chia seed in the smoothie, give my kids some omega-3s. One study of 1,416 patients in France found that those who had fish weekly had decreased incidence of developing dementia over 7 years. A follow-up, the hazard ratio was 0.66, and there was no significant association found between meat consumption and risk of dementia. However, the people who had the higher fish had a decreased risk of developing dementia. You have to take this in the context of other studies, like how much meat is too meat, how much saturated fat is too much. Some of the other studies that I cited before pointed to more polyunsaturated fats. Not polyunsaturated, more monosaturated fats. I'm like tying my head into a knot here, thinking through this stuff clearly. So things like avocados, peanut butter, nuts, seeds, olive oil, peanut oil, those are the monosaturated fats. You definitely want those. You also want omega-3 fats. That's the summary so far. And you want the Mediterranean diet type foods. Okay. On to my next point, high sugar diets are not recommended. And so, in one study in rats, high fat and high refined sugar diets had decreased brain-derived neurotrophic factor and decreased neuroplasticity, which means that they basically were unable to sprout new neurons in the same way in the brain. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor is like miracle-grow for the brain. Neuroplasticity is important for new memories and memory consolidation. It's important for sensorium. And so, super high fat, super refined sugar diets decrease these really important things in animal studies. In a study following 937 subjects for 3.7 years, found that those in the highest total carbohydrate group had almost double the risk for developing cognitive impairment, whereas those in the high protein and fat had lower risk. When I looked at this study closely, I found that the highest carbohydrate group had the highest refined sugar and fruit, but not vegetables. So, one thing that's important when you look at diet studies is to kind of think through, just because things are associated together doesn't mean that they're a direct cause. And, I think in this group, it's probably more the refined sugar, looking at all the studies together, and it's probably not having enough vegetables. The summary of my diet is, here's what I recommend. Okay. So in the morning, think about oatmeal. Think about putting some almond butter and maybe some flaxseed in the oatmeal. Okay, so you get your good omega-3s from the flaxseed. You get your good monounsaturated fats from the almond butter. And you get the oats, which is a very slow-burning fuel. For lunch, I really recommend doing some salad. And I like to put some avocado on my salad, some nuts. I like to eat salmon a couple times a week. I do some chicken once in a while. And for dinner, I'll do another salad, And so I try to get 2 salads a day because I want a lot of greens. To make it easy, we do a lot of prepackaged salads, but I also like to make my own salad dressings. I like to go downtown. There's this guy who sells olive oil, and I like to get his olive oil and use that because it's delicious. One thing I'll mention about olive oil is look at the back of the olive oil container and make sure that it says there are no trans fats. Because if there are, then they're putting something else into the olive oil. They can lie about what they put into the olive oil. Like they can just say pure olive oil and there's other stuff in there, but they can't lie about there being trans fats or not. And so if there are trans fats, then you're looking at something where olive oil is not 100%. Other things I recommend in terms of diet to most people is taking some sort of fish oil pill. Usually starting out 3 to 4 a day. It can decrease over time as you kind of change your diet around a little bit. So that is my summary on diet. I also recommend that you not go too overboard, that once in a while you splurge and have some ice cream or, enjoy yourself. And my other rule is if someone makes me something, I usually try to eat it, at least some of it. Because I think there's something of value in just collegiality and sharing food together with someone. And so, although on my own, I would prefer my salads. I get the prepackaged salads from different grocery stores and just kind of, throw some stuff on top of it. But there's some of my thoughts on food. All of that will help put the fire out. So the food will help the recovery process. If you eat good amounts of good food, your body will recover from stresses differently. Okay, that's my big sort of takeaway. So if you have any questions about diet, throw them up on one of my Instagram posts or my Facebook post. I'll see if I can address it. If this has been helpful for you, follow my website. I'm going to have a PDF there. You can give this with all of the research and all of my advice to anyone you know who might benefit from it for free. I'll leave a free link to the PDF there. You can download that. I appreciate any positive feedback. If anyone wants to write a positive review on my iTunes, I would be most appreciative. And until then, I will see you next time.